Are we at 10? Oh, sure. Which one is it? That button? Cool. Should we call it? All right. No problem. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Mackenzie Smith. I work on the Client Solutions team in North America.
And my name is Fedor, and I'm on the UCM and APAC region, working as a business development manager.
So we're going to talk to you guys today about what publishers want. The prompt, and I'll kind of skip ahead, the prompt is an interesting one. I'll talk about it a little bit from the North American perspective, at least what we're hearing from publishers through some of our existing projects and some of the market conversations we've had. And then Fedor's going to bring some of his perspective, having worked with a publisher, to bear. We'll go through some structures of how publishers are set up from a corporate perspective, some of the challenges that we often hear from them, and then what they're demanding of the market. And then we'll take questions at the end. So we're here if you guys have any questions to ask of us. We won't get too much into solutions. I think you're going to hear a lot of that later on in the week, either from the strategy office or from some of the other presentations. So this is largely like representation of what we're hearing from the market and from past experience.
Yes, so previously my job was at First Russia. Fun coincidence, they sit in the same building as we. And I was responsible for all the programmatic and partnership revenue built with ad tech staff, and also hired and managed a team of field manager, ad and tech ops. I've exceeded on all the revenue goals, and our branch was third for global programmatic revenue at First Magazines International.
So Fedor represents a lot of what the publishers do on a day-to-day basis, and I'm coming to you as somebody who just talks to a lot of publishers. I work with Mike and Rohan and Kate and Alexandra and Georgie and the rest of the Supply BU on TrustX. I've been with them since day one, about 2 years ago. And then also have spent a lot of time with our North American task force talking directly to publishers. So for the first half of this year, we spent a significant amount of time just sitting down with publishers, buying them a cup of coffee, sending out surveys and questionnaires, and asking the general question of, what problems are ad tech either creating for you or not solving for you, and trying to understand how we might bring that to the teams either in Moscow or Berlin to try and develop some technical solutions or some services-based solutions that might solve those publishers' problems as part of our broader corporate strategy. In addition to TrustX, just to give you guys a little bit of background, I work across a couple of other projects in supply and demand. And then I'm just interested to kind of hear some of the questions that come up from you guys later in the presentation. So with that, Fedor?
Yeah, so we created this simplified publisher organizational structure,
And this is simplified.
Yeah, it's really simplified, and it covers only monetization area. So here we can see this from the top, the board of trustees, and it's also one important remark that it's from the Hearst structure, Hearst US. So in Hearst they have a board of trustees, and it oversees a lot of divisions, and especially Hearst magazines. So they have a CEO of Hearst magazines who also oversees several SVPs and also president of digital and CEO. So starting from the president of digital, he oversees several roles. One of this is a chief revenue officer, and this guy is like the one who makes decisions on which technology to invest, and how many revenue is planning on this year, on this quarter, etc. And also they have a direct sales department, programmatic department, and partnerships. In each department there are sales engineers, technical operation managers, ad operations, and several others. All these departments generate revenue, as you can see, and there are at the bottom revenue operations, who oversees all the revenue that is coming through each of the department, and calculating the yield per division or yield per business unit. Where you can see the business unit, it can usually be like some magazine, for example, Elle or Marie Claire or Vogue, and within this business unit there are sales managers that sell only this brand, and there are integrated sales that sell not only digital but also print.
So I think one of the most helpful things for me when Fedor first put this together was to think about the fact that, like, on some of our projects we may intersect with 3 or 4 people, and they're having to go around their building and talk to all of these different department heads and get sign off at some different point. So really for the Hearst project that we've been talking about, like, the call that I had last night was with this one person who then needs to corral all of these different people in order to get a single signature. And so when we're talking about, like, speed to market and getting our products out there, I think one of the biggest challenges from a market perspective is to transmit back to you guys that the blockers that we often have are these sort of large and complicated organizations that things need to sort of slowly move through. And while it's not technically efficient, it's part of the way that our business runs. So I think this is really helpful to illustrate how publishers have some challenges and some structures that we just need to be mindful of when we're trying to bring them technology and services.
Yeah. Also, we can approach different point of entry to the publisher. Not only, zero, but we can also approach CTO level because they are on par with the chief revenue officer.
Yeah. So then moving into sort of the functional areas of responsibility, Fedor helped educate me on some of the 3 areas. So when we look at that big org chart, they also break down into core areas of production, distribution, and monetization. Do you want to talk a little bit about the details, Fedor?
Yeah, so this scheme, this org was covered only for the monetization, but we have also on the publisher side production of the content, and there sits editorial office with editors for each brand, video and audio production teams, and it's very new for big publishers. And also they have branded content, the specialized team that sits within the editorial office, but these editors only create content for brands, only commercial content. Also, there is distribution of the content, and this is there where all the developers within the publishers sits. They are creating sites, they are creating and maintaining it. They also develop content management system. You could talk about first this content management system called MediaOS, and it is developed in-house. And also they overlook social media and SEO and feeds. So all that is falling to the distribution of this content. And on the monetization area, there is direct sales, obviously. The teams who are working with agencies and advertisers directly. Programmatic, it covers several types of deals: open exchange, private deals, programmatic guaranteed, and recent efforts of publishers to diversify their revenue is e-commerce and partnerships that are focused on driving sales for the advertiser.
Yeah, so like in this structure, I think one of the biggest illustrations for us from the regional perspective is when we talk to publishers about building their own internal SSP, and we think about helping them to build a business internally. The project that we talked a lot about last year with Turner, while we focus on monetization and we were talking largely with their programmatic team, we were also having conversations with the team that manages their CMS to ensure that we were accepting metadata appropriately from the editorial team that they might use for monetization purposes. We were talking with their social team to make sure that we were integrating any of those values into the programmatic solution that we were building. And then we were also talking with their content development team and their branded content team in terms of how they can integrate from the monetization side of things into distribution and production. So I think one of the ways that this is helpful for us to think about the technology solutions that we bring to market is that while our stakeholders might largely sit in monetization, again, they have to work across a pretty broad organization, and we can also find value in those other parts of their organization as a way of making the programmatic solutions better. And then, of course, there are challenges in each. So to just kind of give some quick voiceovers from the publisher's perspective, I think, actually, Fedor, do you want to take the first two?
Yeah, so on the production area, there is a cuts in editorial budgets and shrinking stuff because it's very expensive to produce, especially video. So every chief editorial is looking to cut the budget. And also adapting editorial policies to fit new media consumption patterns and channels. Maybe you've seen this big chart of how much channels should cover a publisher to present his content. And also, it is very important to make right KPIs for the editorial teams and to align it with the sales process. On the distribution area, ensuring the quality of content is really important on part of the brand safety. It's interesting part on the predicting virality, because when editor is writing his article, he doesn't know if it become viral, how many impressions will it generate. So to predict it is very important for the business of the publisher. And the crucial part of all the publisher business is to develop and maintain in-house content management system because it's the core parts of distribution of the publisher's content.
Yeah, and I think on that last one in particular, we're starting to see some interesting developments. The Washington Post, for example, is licensing out some of their in-house tech that they've built and developed that's specific to management of a CMS. So there's this whole workflow related to getting the editorial content out the door that's about how do you let editors manage their content in real time and hit their deadlines and manage around breaking news that needs to intersect with technical policies around whether or not something is ready to be pushed to production. And so the Washington Post, they're not super focused right now on the monetization side of things, but they've said, look, we have a development team in-house that's built this CMS. We think it works well for publishers' needs and use cases, and we're willing to license it out. So you're seeing publishers start to diversify what they offer, not just on the sort of news and content side, but also on the technology side. And then as far as monetization is concerned, unique ad products offer sort of an interesting challenge that we've heard from publishers in two ways. One, they are constantly seeking differentiation in the market. So buyers want the new sexy type of display unit or some sort of push down. And then they're also fighting the battle internally with their editorial team because the editorial team obviously wants news front and center. Ads are like a pain that they have to deal with and they would rather not think about. Competition between direct and programmatic. Fedor was actually giving me a great use case this morning around what happened at Hearst. You often have the battle between who controls the direct budget versus the programmatic budget. And the winner of those two, sort of similar to an agency structure, often moves up in the organization. Hearst has the story that I think iPhone would like, which is that programmatic won the day. But you often see those sorts of tensions, largely because direct represents forecastable revenue that a business can plan around. Programmatic represents a sort of potentially infinite pipe, but something that they can't make their shareholders feel secure around. And so if you think about it from a business planning perspective, things like programmatic guaranteed start to get really attractive to them because all of a sudden, okay, we can potentially count on that revenue, plan our head count around it, give our shareholders something that they can actually get excited about. Inventory pricing is a constant battle. I think the virality point that you brought up is super critical when you think about, okay, it's forecasting and a rate card and a little bit of magic fairy dust, and somebody's going to figure out what the appropriate way is to price this inventory. Do I trust that to an algorithm? Do I need an entire BI team that's responsible for setting that rate card? And how do I organize that across my organization? Header bidding and waterfall management, this is one that this company knows well. I'm looking straight at Vasily as I say that, but between sort of the needs around integrating with new technology partners, maintaining those new technology partners, and then deciding who gets prioritized where, whole new set of challenges for publishers in the last 2 years. Being able to define user lifetime value and ROI by channel is one that we come up against often in conversations with publishers, especially around pricing. So the logical way to approach pricing would be to say, okay, you know generally how much this particular user is worth to you as a business. That's a simple statement to say, but not a very simple question to answer when you think about all the stakeholders that might be involved in providing that answer. And so one of the real life use cases that we've run up against when talking with publishers is, from a technical perspective, we would love to get a fixed value that represents the worthiness of a user to the system that we're building. So let's come up with some type of a bid multiplier or bid reducer based on lifetime value. And the feedback that we hear over and over and over again is that if you make this a purely CPM-based decision about the value of a user, you're going to miss out on all of the business context. I have to have business rules and I have to be able to give brand restrictions, or else, frankly, I'll get fired from my job. And so that's one of the sort of interesting interplays that we start to come up against when we're trying to build technology, is that there are all of these sort of exceptions to the rules that we would like to set. Yield data is one that I think, again, this group knows well. How do I match data from multiple different partners in an efficient way? Data leakage is one that I think gets talked a lot about in the North American market without a lot of definition. There's this general anxiety that someone is taking my data and doing something with it. And when you push publishers to be a little bit more specific about what that means, it's pretty challenging. But there is this sort of general concern that the more information that I let out in my bid request that I'm not in control of, somebody else has the opportunity to make money off of it. And while they don't often have a very prescriptive point of view on how they should make money on it, they are starting to become more and more aware that it's their asset that they're leaking out. And so when we start to think about building supply-side technology and solutions for publishers, that's one sort of point of, or one challenge that we could start to address is how do we arm publishers and empower them to use their data as an asset as opposed to just letting it leak out as a part of sort of the natural course of business. And then finally, ad quality. I think in our publisher interviews, if there were two things that came up consistently from publishers that would have gotten us some sort of a signed contract that day, it's if you could tell me who's buying my inventory, so I want to know exactly who the buyer is and what they're interested in, and if you could prevent me from having crappy ads on my website, I would hire you in an instant. Because the ad quality problem in particular represents an email straight to the CEO that's going to challenge somebody's career path, and it's going to make their life a pretty difficult situation while they try and track down where that sketchy looking ad came from. So some of these have more sort of emotional components, some of them have more technical components, but they all represent challenges for publishers, certainly. Can we hold questions to the end? Thank you. All right, go ahead, Fedor.
Yeah, so on what publishers demand of AdTech, for sure it's equality and transparency, and as Mackenzie said, we can talk about this cloud fee structure and auction dynamics. This is what publishers typically demand when they are talking to their AdTech partners, because they don't understand how the business is made on the SSP side. They don't understand what fees are there and how the auction is followed. Also, the must is the API access to the data, because it's very important for publisher to have this access to run all of his yield reports, because typical publisher has like 10 to 15 partners who are generating money for him. So it is important to get all this data into one sort of BI tool to make consolidated yield report. As for ad quality, Mackenzie already covered it. Also, publishers want direct relationships with the demand. They want to set up program guaranteed deals and access DSPs directly, not via the SSPs, to reduce the aforementioned fees. On the privacy and compliance, it covers the GDPR, so publishers demand AdTech players to be compliant with all the new regulations, and also maybe even educate them. On the non-partners, publishers would like to partner only with those players that are listed and trusted in the industry, and that's why they came up with the STXT initiative. On the diversification, I've already told that the publishers right now started seeing that they they can't rely only on the display revenue, only on the programmatic revenue. So they are starting to search for new revenue streams, and especially it can be e-commerce, it can be events, and also subscription revenue, which is very often we can see on the news sites like New York Times, and I think if AdTech can help publishers to drive and explore new revenue streams, it can be win-win situation for both, for publishers and for AdTech players.
I think on that last point in particular, if you wanted to kind of come up with a use case, if you think about what we have in front of us, there's this idea of, okay, do you understand the publisher's internal structure? We have a helpful diagram from Fedor, and then there's sort of the navigation on a per publisher level that says maybe there's somebody within their analytics group or somebody within their programmatic group that's trying to push forward an agenda around monetization by audience type. OpenWeb is perfectly primed to build a solution that starts to address that particular need within a particular publisher, pilot that out with partnership, and then start to take that to different publishers. But that's based in the idea that we understand the challenges that publishers have, their changing landscape, and then also their internal structure as a way of bringing technology solutions to market. Because what we're hearing more and more is, I understand how to get my ad requests from point A to point D, and I also understand that it hits a lot of players in the middle that may or may not be necessary. I'd like to shrink that down, and how do I get back more control? So I think with that, we can move to questions. Yeah, Tim.
So on the last slide, it was like what publishers are asking about tech. They say, oh, they want to be closer to demand, they want transparency. How does that sum with the battle royale that is header bidding and fighting for CPMs? Like, it seems like they're completely conflicting concepts.
I think there's one challenge that we didn't quite bring up here, but maybe goes back to the organizational structure, which is, if we look up here, this guy has a monthly goal he needs to hit, and this guy is talking to the, or woman, is talking to the board of trustees about where they're going in 5 years. And so there's a little bit of conflation between those two. And one thing that we heard at Ad Monsters, Dino and I were talking with some publishers about this last week. They were giving a session about what's the right way to bring solutions to publishers. Do you guys want to hear the big grand vision and where we're going to take you in 5 to 15 years? Or do you want an easy test that demonstrates a business case internally? And they said, frankly, best case scenario, we'd like both. But I can't get, as somebody in the RevOps side of things or even on the CRO side, remember what Fedor was saying, there are 30 of these within Hearst alone. And so there's a CTO for each of those. Like, we've got a lot of little fiefdoms that we have to cross. And so something like header bidding represents the short-term win, and then somebody else within the publisher is responsible for thinking about where this goes 5 years from now. So I guess the short answer to your question is, unless we bring like an immediate solution to this person, we don't stand a chance at having the higher level conversation.
Could you show the slide where you have three?
This-
Next one. You said that they're using budgets for production of building new content. Isn't it a core business that you make for everything else to work?
Yeah, it's core, but I think it's the biggest part of their loss in terms of the biggest cost of their business. So they are trying to cut it.
Yeah.
Because it is hard to maintain it in this way. I mean.
Yeah, I would say even like from reduced editorial budgets, the lens that it takes, at least in the North American market, is 30 years ago, print journalism was pretty healthily sustained by either subscription or ads revenue. In the transition to digital, ads revenue is not sufficient to support a newsroom that's the same size as it once was. And the shift in content consumption from print into something like video, which may have much higher production costs, also makes their cost of operating much higher. And so if you think about experimentation into different media types, we no longer need to only print something, we have to print it, we have to host it online, we have to distribute it. Plus we have less revenue coming in across the board from ad sales than we did 30 years ago. You've got a lot of old businesses that are trying to transition into a new model. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat.
Okay.
But it looks like no one knows if this business model is can survive.
I mean, this is a purely personal anecdote, but if I talk to any of my friends who work in journalism, yeah, they're scared about the future of the news industry. That's news in particular. Do you know?
Yeah, I think it's more of a comment, maybe answering even that, right? The challenge right now is content is a commodity for the most part, unless you're a Wall Street Journal. It's a commodity, and what's happened is publishers haven't. I like to think of publishers as like very old grandparents who get the interweb.
But they're wise in their own way and valuable in their own way.
Very wise, but they're so used to doing things in the old way.
Yeah.
The organization hasn't adapted to being able to be efficient to allow for ad revenue to make up for the gap, right? At its peak in publishing, there was a magazine called Computer Shopper. Computer Shopper had 1,000 pages. Does anybody remember Computer Shopper? Yeah.
Number one fan.
It had 1,000 pages twice a week. 850 pages were advertising in that. They were making over $300 million a year, okay? They shut down in 2009. Their peak was 1999. So within 10 years, it fell apart because of online content, right? The reality is you have a lot more opportunity from an inventory perspective to sell online content. They haven't figured out how to monetize it. What happened is big players come in like Google at the end of the day and figured out how to take a big part of the revenue, and the publishers now are all fighting for nickels instead of dollars. And they don't realize that there are dollars out there to be had, and they don't understand how to take control back as the challenge. So until that shifts in the market, and I don't know if it does, if it doesn't shift, I think publishers are dead at the end of the day for the most part. I don't think they have a chance to win at this game. If it does change, and we're a part of telling the story out there, TrustX as an example, right? If it does change, I think there's a huge opportunity for publishers to start taking control back of revenue. But that's what's exciting to me about Icon Web, is we actually have a solution or a set of solutions to allow them to take control back and compete against Google.
Yeah.
And that's what's exciting about the next year or two, is just can we get publishers to change the way they think? Because the way they're thinking right now, and we were at Ad Monsters, is very small. It's about hitting daily impression volumes, and you can't do that. It doesn't make sense. That you can't do each of them in their own is too small to actually drive value in terms of how they monetize their content. They have to come together. But it's a big, big change that's going to happen in the industry. And if the publishers don't group together, they're going to fail. It's as simple as that.
Kate?
Are all publishers like that?
Like Hearst?
Well, like that, yeah, like Hearst. Enormous structures, big old wise grandparents. Are there some new players on the market maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe somebody who already did this shift? Are there somebody like this?
I think like a quick example for you would be, like if we look at the group of publishers that work with TrustX, there are some that are digital first. So somebody like a Vox has only ever had a digital presence, and I think when we work with publishers like that, it's much clearer that they have a business that's set up around how to make money digitally. Then you have somebody like a Hearst who manages 30 different mastheads, is a 115-year-old business, and has a much larger uphill battle.
And Tower.
Yeah, exactly, and Tower. And then I think you have people like in the middle that we work with, like Financial Times, who Josh, I don't remember what the exact number is, but something like 90% of their revenue is subscription or direct sold, and they're very comfortable with that as a business model. So I don't think we take Hearst as the end all and be all, but they are definitely representative of premium publishers, particularly in North America. Josh?
Yeah, so you touched a bit on sort of like the history of a lot of the publishers and how at one point they were healthy and they had a revenue model that was largely contingent on subscription. And it was a mixture of subscription and advertisement, but what sort of sustained them was that subscription. And besides, let's say, New York Times, Washington Post, and a few of these content producers that can really come in or demand that users still subscribe, that's largely dropped off the face of the earth. And so to touch on like what Dino said, where all of a sudden we have this model that has two components, one drops off. What we're really good at, one thing, is ads and ad tech, but that's clearly only one component of what historically enabled a publisher to be successful. Whether or not publishers can go back to a subscription model, for me it seems like there's something else out there that isn't strictly ads or strictly display ads that could potentially make a publisher successful again. How much is web focused on, I guess, squeezing more juice out of the ad limit versus working with publishers to figure out like what is that new subscription alternative? And I know that's a huge question, and if anybody had an answer, they could probably save the industry. But like, what is our focus on? One path or the other path or both?
Yeah. I can tell you what I've been told from conversations internally, and then I'm curious if you have other thoughts. But the conversations that I've always had have been, we don't have an interest in a company in terms of like driving traffic. That's not something that we want to get into. It's a messy business. It's not the place we play. I think some of our expansions into emerging technology in the last couple of years indicate that maybe at some point we'd be interested in some of those formats that publishers are diversifying into. So if you take a Vox as an example and their production of podcasts as another sort of audio format that is, or as another media type that is ad sustainable, then maybe that's something that we start to look into if it starts to be transacted programmatically, but it's far above my pay grade to decide whether or not we do that. And then I think what Fedor represented well was that publishers on their own are starting to think more and more about how do we sponsor events, how do we develop some type of a credibility that is outside of just the ad dollars that we command. But yeah, maybe that's a question for the strategy office this afternoon. Yeah. Andre? Yeah. The question is for you, or just to kind of give it for you, is how do publishers look at the cost of their technology relative to the rest of their business? Is there sort of a publisher perspective you want to offer?
Usually they don't have any budgets for technology.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what Dino and I heard last week, which is particularly for ad tech, we hear we don't get a fixed budget for ad tech investments. In fact, what we heard from a couple of publishers, which baffled me, was we have no idea what we're going to need a year from now. And so when the need comes up, we make a business case for it, and then we petition for the dollars, which again baffles me. But I think the other piece is that around cost is that ad tech represents a cost to them. And so when we're asking publishers to build their own solution, all of a sudden it's a cost, as opposed to the way they're used to dealing with an SSP that represents someone who's just paying them. And so we have to think about the way that we charge as well, if we're going to ask them to petition for budget versus simply just get paid as a consequence of working with us, and we've taken our fees out throughout the process. Dino, can I let other people ask? Sorry. Yeah. Linda and Julian, you guys can fight it out.
Surely in that case, a centralized system that multiple publishers can plug into next time.
So could you ask that again?
Surely in that case, a centralized system require upfront payment by publishers would make sense for us to provide to multiple publishers?
Yeah, I think it's a tangled. I don't know that that's the direct answer, only in that publishers also seem to like to feel like they're special snowflakes, and they all have a very specific set of needs. And I don't mean that pejoratively. Like, people like to think that their business is custom. And so there's probably a fine balance between how do we have something that uses a centralized set of infrastructure, minimizes the cost to them, but gives them that sense of control.
You talked a little bit about the publisher's interest in lifetime value, and historically I found that, and also, understanding the data leakage, and historically I found that publishers tend to lag significantly in understanding how to do that even more player like Yahoo. Are you seeing any increased interest in having them own audience segments through a DMP or building their own DMP the way that agencies are sort of bringing DMPs in-house?
Yeah. Do you want to take that?
They already is partnering with DMPs, but they are using it only to enrich private marketplace deals or guaranteed deals. They don't use it to drive revenue for open exchange. So mostly covers agencies and advertisers' needs in audience settings.
I think Linda.
More in the custom advertising section, like
I think this the new wave of how does they call it, CMP or CDP. This is the new platform that is aimed on the exact same concept to evaluate what is the audience and how much does it cost, and how to better price eventually. So it's kind of not DMP, but in another box.
Yeah. Any other questions? Manny?
In terms of like market sentiment, have you found that publishers have been, they show you reservation around investing outside of Facebook and Google? You see that they think that tech investment outside of those two sources would attract the eyeballs and the amount of money they spend on social?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So yesterday when Mike and Rohan were talking, they mentioned that TrustX was trying to provide an alternative to the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. I think we see stats like something like 80% of publishers' ad revenue somehow flows through Google and Facebook for North America. And so when you think about dependency on outside partners, that's a significant risk for them from a business perspective. What we also hear, though, to go back to kind of Tim's question about how do I reconcile header bidding and the big vision, is that the folks that come to the conferences at the VP or senior director level, they know that their money on a day-to-day basis comes reliably from AdX and from Facebook. And so there's this sort of tension between the top-line discussion that we hear in the industry, which is heavily focused on anti-duopoly, we're independent and we want to take control of our solutions, and then the reality of their business. I haven't faced in conversations any resignation around paying an independent provider for technology, but we do hear a lot of consistent demands about how do you integrate with the dependencies that I already have. And so if DFP is well lodged within their workflow, they've paid a BCG X gazillion of dollars to come in and audit that whole supply chain. Like there are all these sort of dependencies that come from previous decisions that they've made. And so there are some inextricable ties to DFP, to Google's and Facebook's that we need to acknowledge. But I haven't heard it as a reason why not to invest in independent technology. It's just a prove to me why kind of a question. All right? Tim, I have no idea what time it is also, so somebody should cut us off if we're...
Could you do a follow-up in a month or two after you talk to publishers about what Index just got caught doing?
I think that'll take about 3 days, but yeah, we can definitely have that conversation. Yeah, there's some interesting stuff coming out of that for sure. Dino?
So just two comments very quick. So to Josh's point and your point on special snowflakes, subscription model, about 10% of publishers in the space probably have a model that, or unique enough content that they can do a subscription model. The problem is you have about 70% of publishers looking into subscription model potentially driving revenue. Because they all think they're special, you can find content anywhere online. So a lot of times it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I would say the whole duopoly, Google and Facebook, it's easy revenue, right? So the example I'll give a retail example, right? If I make, and this is, I know somebody does this, they make coffee machines. That's what their business has been. They've never gone to Walmart or JCPenney or those guys because if you sell to them, they become a big part of your business. And then what ends up happening is if they start to squeeze you on margin or they start to not pay you on time, stuff like that, you have nothing you can do. So what ends up happening is it's easy revenue, but is it the right revenue? And I have a friend who just big order JCPenney. JCPenney said, I'm not going to pay you for it. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I can't sue JCPenney, right? But it was easy revenue. They took the step because like our sales are a little low. I can very easily go there and get revenue. Same with Google, very easy to get revenue there. The problem is long term, it will hurt your business at the end of the day. You put too much volume in there, and that's the story we're telling from a pub side, is you need to have an alternative. If Google's more than 40% of your ad revenue, you put way too many eggs in that basket, and you're so dependent on them that they could force you to sign a GDPR document that says Google's not liable for anything that Google does wrong. As it relates to GDPR, it's on you, and they have to sign it because they can't take the risk of losing Google, right?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, and that's the story we're trying to tell, at least in North America, to publishers. It's a lot of education right now, more than anything. So,
Julian.
Would it not make sense for us to offer a subscription model to publishers and no adverts?
So I think there's two thoughts there. One, what we've definitely talked about with publishers, just from a conceptual perspective, is we can help you treat your traffic differently based on some value that you send to us, but ultimately that has a lot to do with your CMS internally and how your paywalls are constructed. And then secondly, to the point around not having a corporate interest in being responsible for driving traffic, I think we've tended to stay out of that business. I think we could say right now that conservatively we can support something that is subscription-based, but it's not something we're going out there and selling, because it largely needs to come from the publisher's strategy to say we have enough credibility in the marketplace to have a subscription-based model. And to Dino's point, there were a lot of headlines in North America last year about how much revenue the New York Times made, but that's the New York Times, and most publishers would say they know they're not the New York Times, even if that's what they aspire to.
We're deep in conversations with BounceX though, and BounceX is a company that's focused on kind of helping publishers acquire and obtain subscribers.
Yeah.
And so we'll go ahead and hopefully, if we win that project, go ahead and be able to build up on that knowledge and better understand the business.
Yeah. I guess I would say in closing that it's clear from this conversation that there are a lot of people that have been having these publisher conversations, in particular in North America, but I think in other regions as well. So let's keep the conversation going. Thank you, guys.